to complete the process of adding authentication to our app, we need to do some stuff in JavaScript. We have base. I'm sorry, wrong thing. We have base.js that has some of our Firebase stuff already. We'll add a little more in here just to get some of our Firebase stuff living all in the same place. So we're already importing Rebase. We're importing Firebase itself and the database from Firebase database. Now we also need to import Firebase auth. Import Firebase auth. Now we don't need to give that a name, actually, so we don't need to say from. We just need to make sure that we're importing that file. And then the Firebase object that we already have will have all the authentication stuff. So then we initialize our app. We set up the database. That's all good. Now there's this auth object that we're going to need to work with in a couple of other places. So let's make that. Const auth equals app.auth, and that's a method. Notice the parentheses. And I said we're going to need to get to this from some other files. So let's make this a named export. We haven't done that before, right? We've done export default. We've never exported something that has a name, I don't think. Easy enough. That does it. That will export it with the name auth. So how do we import that somewhere else? Signin.js is one place where we're going to need it. So let's just pop over there. Import something from base.js. We can't just say import auth. What do we do? How do we change this? Who remembers named imports? We've never exported something with a name, but we have imported. Yeah. Yeah, curly braces. That's right. So when we import both React and component from the same file, React is the default export from React. This one's a named export, so we have to use curly braces. That does it. Also very similar to the way that we destructure some of the props in our subcomponents with the curly braces. Same idea. So there's a whole process we have to do to log in. Our button has to call some method. It's a fair guess. And what that's going to do is call something from Firebase. If we look at Firebase's documentation, there are a lot of different ways to do this. There are different methods of logging in. There are different, there's all kinds of stuff in here, the bottom line. If we look at this Firebase auth documentation, let's look at the, see, can I get the table of contents here? I have to get really wide to see that. All these methods, sign in with number, sign in with email and password, sign in blah, blah, blah. There's also sign in with pop-up. Let's use sign in with pop-up. As much as we don't like pop-ups, it's actually the easiest thing in this case. Authenticates a Firebase client using a pop-up based OAuth authentication flow. And that's what we're doing, remember? OAuth. So let's get started making this work using sign in with pop-up. Again, our sign in button needs to actually do something, so let's give it an on-click. Let's just call authenticate. Make a method up here called authenticate. Remember, this is not a class. This is just a functional stateless component. Const authenticate equals arrow function. And inside there, this auth object, that's the thing that has sign in with pop-up. Let's see. Pop-up. That's the object that has this sign in with pop-up method. If I had imported Firebase instead, I would say firebase.auth. Like that. You remember that that's what I actually exported. But since I went ahead and did that in base.js, I just say auth dot sign in. Look, here are all my choices. Sign in with pop-up. And it wants an argument that is a provider, which is of type Firebase auth provider. Again, it's a tiny bit complicated. It's not too bad considering all that it does for us. It's a lot easier than rolling our own or having to actually learn how OAuth works. So we need an auth provider. Let's read about those in Firebase's documentation. Okay. Email auth provider, Facebook auth provider, GitHub auth provider. That looks like what we want. Looks like the H is lowercase. Let's make a note of that. GitHub auth provider. So what I'm going to do, I'm once again going to do this in base.js, just so all this stuff is kind of in one place. So I want to set up this auth provider, and this gives me one place where if we do want to add Facebook or Twitter login later, we can do so easily. So I'm going to export another const, this one called GitHub provider. And if we were to read more of the documentation, we would see that what we need to do is create a new instance of this thing from the API. Firebase.auth dot GitHub auth provider. Open close parens. We're using the new keyword. We just need an instance of this object. And we're actually going to use it inside sign in, not here. That's why we're exporting it. But then we don't have to mess with this Firebase object from the other file. We just do all of that from here. So GitHub provider is what I called that. So sign in with pop-up needs that thing as an argument. Let's go ahead and import it. And I could just pass it in here. And I know that it needs that thing from the documentation. Remember, I saw sign in with pop-up, takes an argument that is a provider. But it'd be nice if we later add Twitter support or Facebook support, we could have multiple buttons that all call the same authenticate method. And then pass in the specific provider as an argument. So let's make authenticate actually take an argument. That is some provider. And we'll pass that provider along to sign in with pop-up. So then instead of our button calling authenticate directly, we'll just put a very simple arrow function. Oops. And pass in specifically the GitHub provider. So then if we needed another sign-in button for Facebook or Twitter, we would do the same thing, except we would use the other provider, which we could, again, import from the other file very much the same way. Makes sense so far? Now, after we sign in, we need something else to happen. So what good does signing us in do? Well, I mean, it does authenticate, so maybe that's worth something right there. What if we just did that? First of all, is everything exploding right now? Everything is not exploding. It's complaining that sign in is defined but never used. That's because we imported it, but it's the sign out button that we actually have. So we can't really sign in because we're already, yeah. So maybe we can replace that with the sign in button temporarily. Let's do that. Should be easy enough. We have sign out here. Let's put sign in. And change it to sign in with GitHub. What happens if we click it? Now, in my case, it does something kind of goofy because I have this in full screen mode. What happened to you guys when you click sign in with GitHub? Pop-up came up. What's that look like? Okay, so GitHub, you're being redirected to GitHub's website, and it's telling you that this application wants to be allowed to sign you in using your GitHub credentials, which means they're going to be able to tell a little bit about your GitHub account, right? And it should tell you what all that is. And then it gives you the choice to authorize it. So go ahead and do it. I don't think you need to worry about this app stealing your data because you wrote the app. If your own app steals your data, I don't think you have much room to complain. So hey, it worked. Now I'm signed in, and nothing changed. But we signed in. So you could go out to Firebase and make it so that you can't even see any of your data unless you are signed in. We'll do that eventually. Or you can do it in your own time or something. Remember, that was the default. But I'm sure you can look at the docs and figure out how to do that again. But what we're going to do is make it so that every user has their own list of things. I can't see yours. You can't see mine. So that's what we're going to do. I think that's pretty exciting. How do you feel about that? Good? You like it? You excited about this plan? So I'm going to go ahead and commit this much because that worked. Add GitHub authentication.